Good evening, fantasy football fans. Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant podcast, brought to you by ProFootballFocus.com Fantasy and powered by DraftKings. Michael, glad to be back with you again this week, if only temporarily. I'm glad one of the two of us is, doing his job every week, but I guess we both can say that. Pretty disappointing week for both of us in terms of our real team support. So maybe we should just go ahead and dive into the fantasy topics for today so we can, salvage what is left of week 7.
Yeah, what was the
Michael, you and I.
What was the combined losses of both of our teams, Scott? I'm curious. I know mine was 25, so.
I have to assume the Panthers were higher, but I actually stopped watching it after a while because it was just too painful.
I think they were 38-17. So 21, and then the 49ers lost 42-17. So you're looking at an average of 23 points. So, yeah, I'd say you and I probably checked out pretty early.
I did check in enough to notice that Derek Anderson came into the game, and I suspect that he's probably leading the league in passer rating and all the other rated statistics for quarterbacks.
Yeah, with a minimum of 2 pass attempts. So,
but he had a great week 1 too, so I would say go ahead and pick him up in all fantasy formats. But the important thing today is Michael and I recently updated our dynasty rankings. Michael is actually joining us with the dynasty rankings from now on, so that'll be really exciting to have you on the board there, so we can yell at each other, and that'll be good. But I think this is a really good time of the year to be talking about it, especially there are teams. I have teams that are already ready to rebuild, and so this is probably a good time to hit on some of those topics. And I think that's going to probably end up being the majority of our show. But before we get to the differences we have in our updated rankings there, I want to touch on the important news items. And some of these are sort of from this week, and some of them are over the last couple of weeks when I haven't had a chance to talk to you specifically about your opinions on these things. But, Michael, because of the dynasty rankings and wanting to spend the most of the show on that, let's not spend too much time on any one of these. But to start with, I'm just going to go position by position here. Let's start at quarterback. Michael, Russell Wilson. I know the Seahawks are having some trouble winning games, but he has 240 rushing yards over the last 3 weeks and is now the number 5 quarterback for the season. What are your thoughts on that? Is Wilson becoming an elite quarterback in fantasy?
The short answer is yes, Scott. And look, and actually I read an article, I think it was by Bill Barnwell even today, that the Seattle offense is actually scoring a half a point more this season than they were last season. So, look, it's not a fluke. I mean, I'm buying in. And the amazing thing to me is they don't have any household names, at least on the receiving end, right? I mean, they've got good players, I think, that are probably underrated, but it's not like they have a superstar that is catching balls. And of course, you had the Percy Harvin trade, which that's its own fun. But
that'll be coming up. Teaser.
Right. But no, look, I hate the Seahawks because they're the mortal enemy of the 49ers. But yeah, if Russell Wilson is my quarterback 1 in any fantasy format, I'm okay with that.
Do you think Wilson's going to outrush Kaepernick the rest of the way? Speaking of your 49ers.
Oh yeah, I think, and it pains me to say this, I think the 49ers are still in a bit of a identity crisis, meaning they don't really know quite yet what to do with Kaepernick. Are they a power running team? Do they chuck it more because they have supposedly these more weapons? But yeah, you know what you're getting with Wilson, and he's apparently just not afraid to run it. So yeah, I would make that prediction. I don't even think it's that bold of a prediction.
I don't think you're wrong about that either. The thing I love about Wilson is he never takes big hits. I know we're always concerned about how small he is. But I kind of view Wilson's rushing the way I do Cam Newton's rushing, but from a different perspective. With Newton, it's that he's built like a linebacker, and I'm just not concerned that he's going to take shots. I say that as he's got 5 injuries right now. But
I was going to say,
with Wilson,
Scott.
It may not even matter. But with Wilson, he's rushing all over the place right now on those bootlegs, but he's never getting touched because he's either sliding or getting out of bounds before anyone can hit him. So I feel really good about him from that perspective. So let's talk about him compared to some of the other guys that are near the top of the list. Just talking about redraft rankings right now, I think we can probably agree that Peyton and Andrew Luck are a little bit above the field right now. But what do you think about Wilson compared to Jay Cutler? Who do you want the rest of the way?
Oh, I'd probably take Wilson just because I view Wilson as way more consistent than Cutler. I mean, don't get me wrong, Cutler could go for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns a week, but it's sort of like you have to pair that with the stinker he had yesterday with 190 yards and I think one touchdown. So, yeah, I would go with Wilson all day.
Same. What about Wilson or Drew Brees?
Ooh. You know, 7 weeks is a big sample. I mean, I would probably still go Wilson. I mean, I don't know what is wrong with Drew Brees, and look, I even touched on it in my latest article for the site, but something is up that he's just not as consistent as he was, and for whatever reason, you can blame Jimmy Graham not being 100%, whatever you want to call it. He's just not airing it out nearly as much as he's used to. So I would probably go Wilson, but it's close.
What about Wilson or Phillip Rivers?
Ooh, man, I'd probably still go Wilson on that one. I would go Wilson with, I think, damn near anybody, Scott, other than Peyton, Luck, and probably Rodgers. I'd still take Rodgers.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention Rodgers. He's obviously in the top 3 as well. So Wilson is in your top 5. He's looking like 4 or 5 for you.
Definitely.
That's cool.
Definitely.
I mentioned him briefly, but are you back in on Cam Newton? 2 weeks ago, he had like 18 rushes or whatever it was. Didn't look fully healthy, but didn't stop him from running the ball and running effectively. Last week, obviously, getting demolished by the Packers. Harder to know, but do you view Cam as back to what he was, and what he was a top 5 quarterback for 3 straight years?
Yeah, I think he's closer to that than he was, and I definitely think the arrow is pointing up for Cam. I mean, look, you've got a very good young receiver in Benjamin. You still have Mr. Reliable Greg Olsen. I mean, there's no reason for me to be concerned there. I think he's going to get back to where he was.
I agree. I think that Cam will be as productive as he had been in his previous career the rest of the way this season, but I think a couple of other quarterbacks have risen their game to muscle him out, so to speak. But I would still see him in the 5 to 7 range right now for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and well, you mentioned this not last week, but a couple weeks ago. There's just a big pool of quarterbacks that are scoring at a QB1 rate, right? I mean, not at the elite level that the Rodgers, Manning, and Luck are, but you have a pretty crowded bandwagon there with your Rivers and Wilson and Newton and all that. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think Newton's changed. I think there's just a lot more quarterbacks that are catching up to him.
I think that those guys that you just mentioned are probably another step above the huge quagmire of like the 15 quarterbacks. So I would definitely say that Newton has value over those guys, and I think clearly Wilson and Rivers do as well. So I think he might be a little bit more valuable than that. A couple of guys that have been considered among that class that are not playing that well, Matthew Stafford and Matt Ryan, they have 3 and 4 touchdowns respectively over the last 3 games. Are they falling out of your top 10 right now? What do you think about them in redraft formats?
Redraft formats, I would if I were to pick between those two, hypothetically, I'd go Stafford only because he's going to get Calvin Johnson back. And look, I'm a Golden Tate fan, and we may cover this later with the dynasty rankings, but I'm a believer in Golden Tate. I may be one of the few, but I think Stafford has a lot better chance to get back to where he's used to than Ryan. I mean, the Falcons, I think, just as a whole are a mess right now, and look, it's not necessarily all Ryan's fault. I mean, that offensive line is just atrocious. And look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if you get pressured more, you're not going to throw as well. And Ryan is getting pressured. So, I think Ryan, for me, is definitely outside the top 10. Stafford's not there yet, and I don't think he will slip that far.
Would you rather have Stafford or Eli Manning?
Ooh. Before the Cruz injury, I might have given some serious thought to Manning. I would still go Stafford, though, I think.
Okay. What about Matt Ryan or Ryan Tannehill?
Ooh, man. Tannehill is surprising me. He really is. I was not a Tannehill believer, but to me, this is going to be the coward's way out. I think that's a wash at this point. I think, look, I mean, yes, Ryan has the weapons, but Tannehill has just been way more efficient, I think, this year. So, and look, he can run. Matt Ryan will not give you any rushing yards. Tannehill at least could give you 20 to 30 yards potentially a game. So, that's a wash, and I might take Tannehill, but it'd be very, very close.
Yeah, that is definitely not the coward's way out, Michael, because 2 weeks ago, Matt Ryan was a top 7 quarterback in most people's rankings, and Ryan Tannehill was about to get benched in Denver, or where was he? He was in London or something, playing Oakland.
Right.
So yeah, obviously things have changed dramatically there. Let's move over to running backs. Because of an injury to Stevan Ridley, Shane Vereen was able to step in and actually get a pretty healthy workload for the first time of the season. 16 touches on the game. I think 5 of them were maybe catches, and scored 2 touchdowns. I think more importantly, only 3 carries for Jonas Gray, who was promoted from the practice squad earlier in the week. No carries and 1 catch for Brandon Bolden, who's been just terrible running the ball this year in any case. James White inactive. Michael, was he inactive as a healthy scratch, or was he hurt? I'm still not sure about James White.
I believe he was a healthy scratch. He's in the Belichick rookie doghouse until further notice, I think.
Yeah, I think that's just like a random thing. He just spins a wheel, like Wheel of Fortune, and it's like, oh, James White, I hate you right now.
Right.
Whatever.
Or he
but anyway,
messes with fantasy owners, and he goes, you know what, James White, you're getting all the hype this week. I'm going to bench you. Take that.
What if Belichick is secretly making like millions of dollars on like FanDuel and some of those and DraftKings, show sponsor DraftKings? That would be hilarious.
He's your anyway winner each week.
Exactly. But what do you think about Vereen now? Like, do you treat him as a clear running back too, now that he's getting what looks like the full portion of the Patriots' workload, or do you think maybe this was game specific, or like what do you think about the Patriots' backfield right now?
No. Well, at first I thought you were going to say a clear running back 1, which I would have disagreed with you, but you didn't.
No,
you didn't.
Said that. No.
Running back 2, yes, I would say so, only because he's seemingly the only running back in New England that Belichick trusts at this point. And look, yes, it was only 1 game without Ridley, but I don't necessarily see Brandon Bolden charging his way through the starting lineup. So, and look, especially in PPR league, Vereen was always viewed as a potential running back 2, and now I think probably even more so. So, yeah, clear running back 2 with Vereen, I'd be okay with that. A low-end running back 2, but yeah, I'd be okay with that.
I can't win with Vereen because I kept him in my top 20 for the first 5 or so weeks of the season, being like, no, it's game plan, he's going to catch the ball a lot. And then I finally abandoned that and left him out of my top 30 this week, and advised several people with the terrible call there. I don't know. I think Vereen will be fine. I'm not sure that he's a clear running back 2 still, despite this game. I kind of feel like Jonas Gray may end up with 10 carries this next game just because. But also just because he's big, and Vereen still isn't big. So I don't know. I'm still not convinced that this really susses anything out. I feel like next week we could be asking the same question about really any of these backs, except probably Brandon Bolden, who I just don't think is good enough.
Well, and you're going to be on the hook, Scott, for telling a bunch of people Jonas Gray was it on their FanDuel team. So just be careful.
I'll put my name stamp behind it. Jonas Gray, 10 carries this week.
There you go.
Okay. There were several guys over either this week in the combination of the last couple of weeks that are interesting as potentially new ads. Depending on the depth of your league, some of these guys probably are still available despite performing well, just because there's just been, I guess, a glut of injuries and other situations where it's not clear what the long-term prognosis is. But let's try to talk about some of these guys here, Michael, and maybe you can sort out who you prefer among the group. I'm thinking about Ronnie Hillman in Denver. He's had 2 nice weeks in a row. Monte Ball probably back in the next few weeks, but maybe he doesn't have his job when he's coming back. Denard Robinson of Jacksonville. Impressed in his first start, but that first start is just 1 game. I know Jacksonville struggled all year running. Trey Mason maybe taking over in St. Louis. Jerick McKinnon clearly taking over in Minnesota. Brandon Oliver performed really well again this last week. Has to deal with the starter there. Ryan Matthews coming back probably in a week or 2. And then Buffalo losing both of its starting running backs this week. Not sure if that leaves Anthony Dixon or potentially Bryce Brown, who's been inactive all year, but presumably may even be the lead back going forward. Can you rank those guys for me for the rest of the season? Like, who are the guys that you are willing to spend your hard-earned fab bids on? Because a lot of these guys may not be starting 4 weeks from now.
Sure. I think McKinnon's right at the top of the list. I mean, I think he's proven that he can handle the load. And look, it's just a fact. Matt Asiata is not good. That's a fact. So he would probably be at the top of the list. Trey Mason would definitely be up there as well. I mean, look, I don't know that anyone saw Zach Stacy with 0 carries yesterday, but that's what happened. And look, they won, and that's goes a long way, I think, with coaches. They are, they don't want to mess with what they think is a winning formula. And yesterday it involved Trey Mason. So
against Seattle too. I mean, that's a traditionally stout run defense, obviously.
Right, and I guarantee you Trey Mason was not owned in a lot of leagues because, I mean, he literally came out of nowhere and just took that job over.
I don't even think I ranked him this week. I mean,
right.
clearly a miss on my part, but an understandable risk given that he kind of came out of nowhere.
He did, no, completely. You know what? I've been a big Brandon Oliver fan. I'm not quite sure that they're just going to let Ryan Matthews stay on the bench. I mean, I think they're going to try to work both of them in. So he would probably be lower on the tier. You mentioned, who was the very first running back you mentioned?
Ronnie Hillman.
Yeah, okay. Ronnie Hillman is big on my list too, because I have him in a couple leagues. And look, I'm a Monte Ball dynasty owner, but even I recognize when it's probably not happening. And for whatever reason, it just wasn't the first month or so with Ball. And look, Hillman's running a lot more effectively, and more importantly, and this is the most important part in that offense, he's protecting Peyton Manning. So as long as he keeps doing that and they keep winning, I really don't see Monte Ball getting quite the workload that he was. So, out of the guys you mentioned, it would probably go McKinnon and Mason as like a 1A, 1B with Hillman right behind him, and probably Oliver after that.
For me, McKinnon is head and shoulders above these guys, both in terms of talent and in terms of safety. Then it gets a little bit trickier for me, but I'm actually going to put Oliver second. I've been very impressed with him as a runner so far this season, and I think that he's got a really safe 4 catches a game no matter what Ryan Matthews' situation is. I think that either Hillman or Mason could potentially lose their jobs at any time, really.
Sure.
I know Hillman's had very good stats his last 2 weeks, but I think it's a little bit smoke and mirrors because obviously teams are not really stacking the box to stop Hillman when Peyton Manning's back there. Not that hasn't been true, obviously, for Monte Ball as well. But I don't like his numbers make you seem like that Hillman may be a special player, and I just don't think that's true either. But I would probably lean towards Mason there the rest of the way too. But McKinnon is obviously the guy. I think McKinnon's a top 10 back the rest of the way, so definitely buying in there. 2 of the guys that are more fixtures, I guess, as running back twos, Frank Gore and Alfred Morris. Neither one of them has scored a touchdown in the last 3 weeks, and they've been pretty bad in terms of their efficiency running the ball as well. For those 2 guys, who would you drop them for any of the names on the list, the previous list, or for all of them potentially?
Yes, I would, and I'd probably drop them at least for McKinnon, and probably going down to Mason and Oliver, I would drop those 2 for them. Look, Alfred Morris, if he were on a lot of other teams, I think he'd be very good, just like he was the last couple years in Washington. But he's just on a bad team that is not conducive to his running style, and it's showing. I mean, he's not getting the volume he was, and even when he does, he hasn't been very effective this year. And look, same goes with Frank Gore, with the added caveat that he's about like 80 years old. So, and look, with Gore, you have Carlos Hyde, who they are not afraid of using. So, yeah, I would be at the point of dropping any of those 2 for the guys you mentioned before. Yeah, I think I'm there.
I definitely drop Gore or Morris for McKinnon, regardless of circumstance. And in shallower formats, I would be fine dropping either of them for Hillman or Oliver, or maybe even Mason, although I expect both Gore and Alfred Morris to outscore them the rest of the way.
Sure.
It's just in shallower format, you're playing for upside, and the other guys have more upside. I mean, Gore's not getting out of the top. I mean, he's not going to enter the top 8 at all this season, and Morris isn't either. How much of this with Morris do you think is scheme change? I mean, we've traditionally been very bad at identifying those zone blocking scheme runners that become effective out of nowhere as a 7th or late round pick. That was sort of the story with Arian Foster too. All of a sudden they have a new offensive scheme this season, and Morris has been ineffective. Is his days just kind of numbered because of the scheme change?
Yeah, sadly, I think so. Because he performed very well the last couple of years. I mean, yards per carry it wasn't just a standard 4.0. You're looking at 4.5, 5 yards a carry, and he's just not there this year. I mean, it's sub 4.0. So, look, he's the kind of guy that needs some time to get going. I mean, nobody will deny that. But if you're only getting 13, 15 carries a game, it's kind of hard to get it going. And you're not a Jerick McKinnon where you could, reel off a 70-yard run at a time. So,
sure.
Yeah, sadly, I think it is. And look, even furthermore, he's just on a bad team. I mean, Washington's just not a good team this year. And they've been better the last 2 years than they are this year, and it's just not happening. So, yeah, we'll get to this a little later, but yeah, I think Morris's dynasty value is probably slipping good too.
It sounds like that I ranked Morris high. That's worrisome. That's not something that I wanted to do.
We'll cover it, Scott. We'll cover it.
Okay, anyway, definitely somebody to think about trading. And speaking of trades, we mentioned earlier, obviously the big news is the Percy Harvin trade. Let's take it from both perspectives, Michael. I want to talk about Seattle first, because Doug Baldwin had 7 catches for 123 yards and a touchdown in his first game in Seattle without Harvin. Baldwin was sneakily effective all of last season as well when Harvin was out for most of the year. Where do you view Baldwin the rest of the way now? Is he a top 20 receiver, a top 30 receiver, top 40? I feel like it could be all over the place right now. I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't. For me, the offense is essentially a carbon copy of what it was last year, which, people didn't realize how good they are, but they were. I mean, they averaged over 3 touchdowns a game, so it wasn't like, they were scraping by on that defense. But at the same time, you still didn't have a receiver last year that was top 20, or I don't believe even top 30. And I don't expect that this year. I mean, I think you have some guys that will be in the 600, 700, 800-yard range, but do I view any of those guys, Baldwin or otherwise, in the 1,000-yard discussion? No. And look, like I said before, they're averaging a half a point more this year. So I don't think having Harvin or not having Harvin is going to be that much of a difference. I think if they stick to their game plan, they're going to be just fine on offense.
I agree. I kind of think that you remove Harvin, and that's not really that many targets that are added back to the offense, and I feel like guys like Paul Richardson and Jermaine Kearse will just fill the void, and none of them will be that usable in fantasy. I think Baldwin is clearly the top of that pile, but again, I'm with you. I don't really see him as better than, say, the 30th wide receiver the rest of the season.
Right.
Possibly someone you're more excited about, Odell Beckham Jr., obviously a really high draft pick this season for the Giants. He scored twice this week as they're sort of dealing with the Victor Cruz loss and what that could potentially mean. Do you think that he's potentially moved ahead of Ruben Randall? I know Randall's calling card before this week was that he was the red zone guy, and Beckham usurped him here. Is Beckham past Randall in your mind?
I probably would, just because, and seemingly we've talked about this before. Ruben Randall's had, 3 or 4 years to take that job, and yet here we are still talking about if Ruben Randall can do it or not. So, yeah, I would probably go Beckham the rest of the way. I think, like you mentioned before, you got to go with upside, and I think Beckham offers more upside than Randall at this point.
I think that's probably true as well. I still have Randall ahead. Again, Randall didn't exactly have a bad game. I think he had 7 catches in this one, too. Out-targeted Beckham for sure. But I think both guys are intriguing, and I haven't been able to decide if one of them is clearly a wide receiver 1 potential player this season. Comparing him to some other players, though, do you want Beckham or Michael Crabtree the rest of the way?
Oh, Beckham. And I'm a 49er fan, and I have no problem saying that.
Crabtree's been a mess. Beckham or James Jones?
Ooh. If it's PPR, it's close, but I'd probably still take Beckham.
Okay. Beckham or Eric Decker, who knows what his situation is going to be with Harvin coming in, but Decker's been pretty darn good so far this season when he's been able to get on the field.
Yeah, and I'd still take Decker. I mean, we've talked about this before. I'm probably a bigger Decker fan than most, but I'd probably take Decker over Beckham there.
I would too. Beckham or Pierre Garçon?
Ooh, Beckham. Look, like I mentioned before, the Washington offense is it's hit and miss as to who is going to be the productive one that week, right? It could be Garçon any given week. It could be Deshaun Jackson. It could be Jordan Reed. You don't know. And no one has been consistent so far. And look, I'm not saying Colt McCoy's bad, but I don't necessarily see like 300-yard games in his future. So, Yeah, I would take Beckham over Garcon, I think. Which, again, I'm a Garcon dynasty owner, so it pains me to say that. But guess what? I'm also a Beckham dynasty owner, too. So
I was going to make a quip about Colt McCoy, but it's kind of irrelevant anyway because Robert Griffin should probably be back in a week or two. So we'll have to figure it out all over again from there.
I think Washington is hoping and praying Robert Griffin's back in Week 8.
It's quite a changing of the tides. Remember 3 weeks ago when everyone thought that his backup was better than him, and it's like, oh yeah, right.
He's
every
top
backup
10
in the NFL is
Scott. Top 10.
Every backup in the NFL is bad, or else he'd be playing because there's not enough good quarterbacks to go around, except for Jimmy Clausen, who's amazing.
Well, yeah.
All right, let's hit one tight end before, and then get into our dynasty rankings. But I thought it worth mentioning that Charles Clay, 3 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown. He's been limited by a knee injury all season, but looked pretty good, I thought, on Sunday, while Miami sort of dismantled the Bears, actually. Are you back in on Clay? Do you think he can be as good as he was last year the rest of the way this season?
Yeah, personally I do. I think he'll top out at sort of that low-end tight end 1 range. Mm-hmm. And look, I think he proved last year he was a very valuable safety valve for Tannehill. And Tannehill, for whatever reason, has still not, had chemistry or whatever you want to call it with Mike Wallace, who's supposed to be the deep threat. So, yeah, I would still bank on Clay probably getting some looks there. And, look, like I said, I think best case scenario, he's a tight end 1, but worst case, he's a tight end 2 for somebody.
What about Clay or Zach Ertz the rest of the way?
Ooh. I might go Ertz only on upside.
Yeah, I would too.
I'd probably go Ertz. I think Clay is the safer bet, but I think Ertz has way more upside than Clay does.
I kind of think Ertz may be safer from a health perspective, but I get what you mean there too. Clay or either Indianapolis tight end.
Oh, Clay. I don't touch the Colt tight ends with a 10-foot pole. No, I'm out.
They're both top 10 this year in points.
That's fine. They're going to break your heart, Scott. Just watch. Okay.
Okay. Clay or Jason Witten?
Oh, man.
That's close for you? I think that's obviously Clay.
Yeah, I would go Clay. Believe me, it pains me to say that, but I would go Clay.
Clay or Jared Cook?
Oh, Clay. And that one's not close.
Clay, yeah.
Yeah.
Clay or Jason Morrow?
I'd go Clay, just because I think he's definitely more reliable at this point than Amaro is. And like you said, you've got Harvin coming in, and who knows how that's going to look now. So
that's true. It's going to throw it into the air. But Amaro was looking kind of interesting over the last few weeks, so that bears watching as well. But we could have spent enough time talking about the news, Michael, so let's talk about some dynasty rankings. Again, I think this is a really good time of the year for that, and I'm glad to have your perspective joining the staff rankings. We have actually quite a few staffers that do dynasty rankings, and I think pretty much everyone should be updated over the rest of this week. Right now it's you, me, and Mike Clay that I've noticed the updates for. I think Pat said his were in too. I haven't looked at his yet, but we both did a little bit of prep for this, so I think, Michael, let's just go back and forth. Let's start with quarterbacks. I'll say one that we have a difference on, and then you can go after me, and we'll go back and forth till we're done with it. How does that sound?
It's nerve-wracking, but I'll do it, Scott.
Okay, the insults are coming. So quarterback first. You have Matthew Stafford as your number 3 quarterback in Dynasty.
I knew
Defend yourself.
I knew it.
Defend yourself or feel the wrath of Cam Newton, my number 3 quarterback in Dynasty.
All right. Oh God, and I'm gonna get just a bunch of data now. For me, it's a couple things. One, it's still scheme there. I still think that offense goes through Stafford. Not that it doesn't go through Newton. I know it does. Look, Stafford's still 26. I think you still have a young Drew Brees there, meaning an offense is going to chuck it. And look, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Stafford is receiver-proof, as we've seen the last couple of weeks without Calvin Johnson. But look, Calvin Johnson's going to be there a while. And if we're talking dynasty, I still like the long-term value of Stafford over a guy like Newton. But hey, I had Newton 4, I think, Scott. So it's not like I was that far off.
Yeah, Newton has nothing to do with this. That was just a joke. The major issue is that I have Stafford at 11th. So we have a pretty huge difference there. And for me, it's that I think the days of Stafford having a huge volume advantage over other teams is over, in part because I feel like the that the Lions are sort of rebranding as a team that can do it with a run and be a defense-first team. I know that this is maybe a short-term thing, but I mean, obviously they've had a lot of turnover in the coaching staffs over the last couple of years. So,
Sure.
I never really thought of Stafford as being one of the elite talented quarterbacks, and I always gave him a boost because of his situation, and I just don't think that situational advantage is there anymore. So I basically think you have Jay Cutler. So it's not a bad thing exactly, but it's not a top 5 quarterback in my mind either. All right, you go.
Okay. Well, let's get to Mr. Jay Cutler, Scott. I have him at 12. You have him at 7. State your case.
Okay, and I think this is going to probably be a consistent theme, maybe less with you, but more between me and probably you to a certain extent too, and a bunch of the other rankers on our staff, which is the question of how much do you value short-term production over long-term potential. And I'm always somebody that sides with players that I think are going to help me now because, A, I think I'm smart enough, and I think you should think you're smart enough to figure out your future when the future comes. I want to try to win now whenever possible. And I think Cutler is a top 5 quarterback the rest of the way this season. And yes, a lot of that situation, obviously you really like having Jeffrey and Marshall and Martellus Bennett, who's been tremendous, and a running back in Forte that can really catch the ball. Cutler also not that old. I mean, really, you're only giving up the age advantage among the really good quarterbacks to the Aaron Rodgers and Andrew Lucks of the world. So I just think he's productive enough in the short term that I'm not really concerned about it otherwise.
Interesting. You see, with me, even with that thinking, which I completely agree with, I'm all about, win now.
Yeah.
I still can pick like 11 quarterbacks I would be more comfortable with, I think, on a week-to-week basis than Cutler, though.
This season, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, Cutler, and don't get me wrong, Cutler, if we're talking, potential, he's up there. There's no doubt about it. But, it's just maddeningly inconsistent, I think, is my feelings on him. And look, I have him in our reality sports league, so I know what it's like to be a Cutler owner, and you just never know. You just don't know what you're going to get week to week, and it scares me. It concerns me. But I definitely understand about I definitely get the short-term need, though. I understand that way of thinking.
How do you think Cutler stands in terms of fantasy points among quarterbacks so far this season?
He's had some good games. He's probably top 8, right?
He's 6th.
Yeah.
He's basically he's 1 point behind Russell Wilson. Obviously, Wilson and Peyton Manning ahead of him have had one fewer game, so not quite a fair comparison. But Cutler is ahead of Kaepernick, ahead of Ryan, ahead of Flacco, ahead of Romo, ahead of Eli, way ahead of Stafford, way ahead of Brady. I think he's better now than you're giving him credit for, and I think that you wouldn't be calling him that inconsistent if he hadn't just had a really terrible game just now. But that's why we have our own rankings, right?
I am playing the part of Brandon Marshall, Scott, and I am calling him out. So
okay, that's fair. Okay, so my turn. That's all the quarterbacks I really had major qualms about. Well, I have Russell Wilson at 4th, and you have him at 9th. Mm-hmm. Probably not really that big of a difference, but just an illustration that I'm way in on Wilson now.
Well,
are there any other? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say something I thought was interesting, and this goes back to exactly what you just said, which is valuing short-term versus long-term. We both have Peyton Manning 5th, which even with the guys you mentioned that updated their rankings on the Pro Football Focus site, we're still the highest-ranked people on Manning, which still surprises me. I mean, I don't understand. He's literally producing more than any other quarterback. I mean, yes, it's a toss-up between him and Luck week to week, but even if you had 2 years of Manning at this level, I would take that over any other guy but 4, it looks like.
That's something that no one has ever really been able to give me a satisfying answer to when I have this argument. Because I'm like, obviously I want Manning now, right? He's the number 1 quarterback for the rest of the year. Maybe you can argue Luck, but I wouldn't. What I'm going to hold on to Colin Kaepernick because I can have 7 years of him as a marginally above replacement level quarterback. No, I would obviously trade him for Peyton.
Right.
So I don't get that thought process, frankly. So I'm glad that you and I agree on that.
I'm with you. I literally, we've talked about this. I literally traded for him in one of my home dynasty leagues, and I gave up like Blake Bortles and Tom Brady and a 1, which I would do that 100 times out of 100.
Yeah. So I agree with you. let's move on to running backs. And let's see. I guess I'll go first. You would ask me the same one here. It's about LaShawn McCoy.
Yep.
You have him number 1 overall. Mike Clay has him number 1 overall. I think everyone but me is going to have him number 1 overall. I have him 13th overall.
Right.
Can I start by asking you this question? Where would you have McCoy ranked for the rest of this season among redraft players?
Sure. I still have him near the top. I mean, I think you could argue between him and Charles as far as a 1A, 1B. I still have him at the top. I'm not ready to jump ship yet. I think, look, he's obviously been hurt by his offensive line trouble. And look, it's still a good team that's surrounding him. So it's not like the wheels have come off yet and they're about to completely tank the season. So he's still up there for me. And look, I'm not ready to abandon ship yet with all he's done so far. And I get not having him as your top one. But yeah, I'm still taking, I guess, what I consider the safer route so far.
Yeah, this is my favorite kind of disagreement, because this isn't me and you having a philosophical difference. This is me and you having a legitimate difference of opinion of how good the player is. And it's not even ability in this case. I think it's situation entirely. I just feel like the Eagles' new offense, which is the one that involves Darren Sproles, is one where McCoy is no longer going to get to run the ball in favorable situations. Every time he's in there, people are thinking run because he's not the passing down back anymore. He's just the running down back. McCoy needs that space to be effective. You saw it last week when he was playing without Darren Sproles in the mix. I think Sproles is a fixture. I think with Sproles, they're a better team, even though McCoy is going to be worse off personally. And so I think McCoy is no longer going to be a special running back in fantasy. So it's not like I have him as a bad ranking, but 13th obviously much worse than the rest of you guys. And that's what I'm thinking there. I think the situation has declined for him dramatically.
And I have no doubts that after the season's over, you're going to see everyone's rankings change. But that's partially because of McCoy, but it's also, and look, running back was the hardest one for me to rank because there's just not that many running backs where you, especially for dynasty purposes, where you go, oh yeah, he'll be around in 3 years, let alone 5 years or beyond. You know.
True, absolutely true.
So,
all right, you go.
All right, let's see. I'm going to go to a favorite of yours, an Isaiah Crowell.
Oh, yeah, love him.
You have I know you do. You have 11th.
Yes, I do.
And I have him 23rd. So please enlighten me.
I love him. There was a Fantasy Pros bold prediction thing, and I actually made my bold prediction is that I think Crowell will finish in the top 10 at running back the rest of this season and will outscore McCoy and Eddie Lacy as well. And obviously that's bold leaning on insanity, and I probably don't think that happens more often than not, but that just sort of gives you my idea of what I think of Cleveland's offensive line and Crowell's advantage and talent over the other two backs in their system. And obviously that's a murky situation because Terrence West was a highly touted rookie, and Ben Tate has been very effective so far this season too when he's been healthy. But I think Crowell is just maybe the second or third most talented back that came out of this class, maybe the most talented. And I know that off-field situations drove down his draft stock, and which is why I think he went undrafted in the first place. But I think that they unearthed a special talent there, and I love the offensive line situation in Cleveland. No team is running more often than Cleveland either, and I don't see that changing no matter what happens at quarterback. I think he's totally the real deal.
So I guess the next question is, Scott, have you bought your Isaiah Crowell jersey yet?
No, it's on back order, I guess.
It's on back order, yeah. All those people in Cleveland, they know what's up.
Everybody in Cleveland's getting excited because they're in the playoff mix, minus that pesky Jaguars loss last week, but whatever.
Yeah. Just as a side note, can we just start the Johnny Manziel watch like now, please?
Well, remember last week when Brian Hoyer was totally the man and that team was going places? God, it's just ridiculous how quick
I think he finished, like, what was it? At one point, he was 10 of 29, and with, like, for 112 yards. I mean, it just wasn't good.
What if you started Manziel, but then you never threw a pass? You just either let him run or let him hand off. The Panthers did that a few years ago with Chris Weinke, and it was awesome.
Yeah, so Crowell, West, and Tate each have 20 carries.
Sure, sign me up.
All right.
Okay, next up, you have Doug Martin 16th. I have him 56th. I don't even think I need to explain myself. I think you need to explain yourself.
Wow, 56. That is a deep drop off.
Clay had him outside of his top 40 as well.
Right. Well, it goes back here. It's a combination of a couple things we touched on so far. So uh, it goes back to short term, meaning running back is such a fickle business. You have to go with the guys that have a better shot, quite honestly, of getting the carries. And I don't think they're ready to completely abandon Martin yet. I said completely. Um, so,
I'm making a face. Everybody can't see on the podcast.
I understand. So to me, it's that. Plus, I still think that offense, when they're fully healthy, can still do some things. And look, I reserve the right to completely change that in the next month or two. But for now, I'm holding steady. Like I said, running back is a fickle business. So until it just completely falls off the cliff, that's what I'm going with.
Yeah, I think you're crazy, obviously. There are a lot of running backs that have jobs right now that you wouldn't go anywhere near. Steven Jackson, for instance. I just feel like Martin is in that category. But, in a month you'll change your mind, and it's cool.
That's fine. And I completely expect that to happen. So.
Okay, your turn.
Well, a guy that we touched on before that we both had ranked at exactly the same spot was Trey Mason at 19th. So I guess the question is, did you do that before or after his breakout game yesterday, Scott? I totally did it after, so I'm not going to claim like I was a genius on that one.
100% after. I didn't have him ranked in my weekly rankings before the week, and I don't really know what to do with him, to tell you the truth. I mean, he's a little small. He's like 209 pounds. Right. That was sort of the question about him coming out, and that's kind of why it would have made sense for them to have a tandem role there with Stacy, but for some reason they hate Stacy. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of the St. Louis situation, but he is a rookie. He did look good last week. He is fast. I don't know if there's things to like. I didn't really know what to do, but I put him 19th.
Yeah, and look, that's squarely in the running back 2 conversation, and I don't think anyone can honestly say that he doesn't look like a good running back 2 heading into next year. And that's what Dynasty's all about, is looking towards next year. And look, I think he's going to be the man in St. Louis, at least going forward and definitely beyond. So,
the one caveat I would say about that is that we thought that about Stacy this time last year too. So just because a back is young doesn't mean that he has the job forever and ever.
Sure, but even after his quote-unquote breakout season, they still drafted Trey Mason, and they still didn't give him, meaning Stacy, the full vote of confidence for whatever reason. And look, apparently it was well-founded because they just did not believe in him whatsoever. And look, Stacy was a volume guy last year. There's no doubt about that. He averaged exactly, I think, 4 yards a carry. Mason, in his game yesterday, his breakout game, 18 carries, still averaged 4.7 yards a carry. The week before, he had 5 for 40. So I think they were probably looking for a little more explosiveness out of that position, and I think they probably assume they have it in Mason. So, yeah, 19th, I'm completely okay with that.
I'm not going to argue that Stacy is an explosive runner, but I think you're shortchanging him a bit in that last year, what did he have, like 25 touches a game after he took over in week 6 or whatever it was? It's like everybody knew the Rams were going to run the ball, and that's all they were going to do. I think he did really well against that clear expectation to average 4 yards per carry or 3.8 or whatever it was. Like, I think he performed well last year, and as far as I can tell, he hasn't really performed badly in his limited opportunities this year. So I feel like this job must have been lost somehow behind the scenes. Like, I don't know whether it was because he looked bad in practice or because maybe he's injured right now or something. I don't know what the situation is, but I think it's unclear.
It's just part of the Rams' plan to just start a rookie at running back every year and cycle through them. Maybe.
Well, I guess we'll find out. Next up on the list, this one probably doesn't need that much. Jerick McKinnon, I have 9th, you have 22nd. Mm-hmm. Is this about Adrian Peterson and how unsure you are of what his situation will be next year?
Yes, completely.
Okay. I don't think there's anything else we need to really say about that, but clearly I'm buying into McKinnon as a talent.
Oh, and believe me, I am too. I mean, look, 22nd is still, a running back too, and I'm sold on him as a starter. I just don't know if it's going to be in Minnesota next year, as soon as next year.
Sure. All right, go ahead.
That's pretty much all I had on running back. If you want to go on to receiver.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of more. These probably won't take a long time either.
Oh, okay.
But Jeremy Hill, I have at 40th. You have at 26th.
Hmm.
I think Mike Clay has Hill in the top 20 as well. So I guess I'm the outlier here. Do you see Hill as a long-term feature back? Because in my mind, he is the Ben Jarvis, Green, Ellis complement to Giovanni Bernard or to whatever back in the system that he's in. So I don't really ever see Hill as a guy with more than running back two upside, even if he had sort of the job. What do you think there?
Sure. No, and like you said, I have him at 26, so I certainly don't have him as a running back two. But look, I think, yeah, and no one's denying he's the Ben Jarvis, Green, Ellis in that offense. But when I look at who they have running the plays, meaning Hugh Jackson, I mean, he did pretty good things in his time in Oakland with two good running backs, and so far at least with Cincinnati. So I'm buying into the fact that I think Hill will get some touchdowns. And look, even him and Bernard have yet to even hit their prime, and I think you could get a couple productive years out of a guy like Hill. And I think, look, as we said, with running backs in Dynasty, it's very, very fickle. So you have to grab on to what you think is a more certain outcome than others. And I think Hill's carved a place for himself out there.
Yeah, I like that. All right, the last running back I have, Darren Sproles, I have at 22. You have at 57.
Oh, Scotty.
This is all me being weird, obviously. But if Darren Sproles wasn't a running back in name, if he was a wide receiver, would that change your mind about him? Or are you very scared about the combination of the 31-year-old and the running back label that Sproles has?
Well, yeah, it's that. It's the age primarily, and just on the week-to-week uncertainty, quite honestly. It's just too much for me to put a lot of stock in. I mean, after this year, who knows what will happen after this year, quite honestly. And look, I'm not going to lie, I'm still a bit scared off from his complete tank job last year, but I guess you could argue that wasn't all his fault. You know, he got injured and they just turned away from him in New Orleans. So, but as you know, as far as future value goes, I'm not there, man. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Scott. I know I let you down.
It's okay. I'm happy being on my Darren Sproles island by myself because 2 years from now I'm still going to be starting him.
You will. And look, I know.
Let's move on to wide receiver. I'll let you go first since I had those last couple of running backs.
Okay, let's talk about maybe one of the bigger disparities. Brandon Cooks. I have him at 32. You have him at 15. Go.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. Has the lack of recent success sort of driven you off Cooks long term? Like, he's not dramatically ahead of where I have Mike Evans. It's just sort of the range I have for receivers that I think are going to become number one receivers down the line, but just aren't there this year. Are you turned off by what he's done lately?
Well, yes, but that's not the main reason. I guess I just, a guy like Evans and a lot of the guys ranked ahead of him, meaning Cooks, I think fall into that potential number one category where they could be the main target in their respective offense. And while Cooks is going to be very good, don't get me wrong, I'm not discounting Cooks, but to me, Jimmy Graham is still the guy in New Orleans that offense is going to go through. A lot like New England and Rob Gronkowski, it goes through the tight end. And look, Cooks is going to provide very good value. And look, I think he could be, at the end of the day, very, very, very good wide receiver too for a dynasty team. But right now, I have him ranked as a wide receiver 3 if you're breaking it out, and especially in standard formats, that's where I'm comfortable with Cooks as a wide receiver 3 right now.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts about that. One is that if you told me that Brandon Cooks had Marcus Colston's career in his future, I would say sign me up, and I would rank him even higher than I have him now.
Sure.
So it's not a requirement for me that you have number one wide receiver upside to be in the top 20 in my dynasty wide receiver rankings. But that being said, I would wager that Cooks has a lot more of his future without Jimmy Graham alongside than he has with Jimmy Graham alongside.
Sure.
I think it's a major risk to assume that Graham has multiple quality seasons left. He's older than you think, and tight ends never hold up. So I'm kind of playing with the talent there, and I think Cooks is going to be successful long term.
Sure.
And who knows about a situation? It's going to change.
Well, my last point on that is, and we sort of covered this before, Drew Brees' the passing production has steadily gone down every year from its peak about 4 years ago. So sort of like you had mentioned with the Lions, where they're probably not going to have the same volume. To me, I see the same thing in New Orleans. Not that they're not going to have a lot of volume, but I don't think they're going to be anywhere near where they were before, which I think cuts into Cooks' potential value. So
that's reasonable. Next up, from my perspective, I have Kelvin Benjamin 11th. That's not really that weird. Mike has him 12th, you have him 16th, but I just wanted to say that I have Benjamin highest. So he's my boy, and you can't have him.
Whoa. I think if you know anything about me by now, Scott, he's my boy too. Okay.
That's true.
Look, yeah, I can't say enough about him, and I will fully admit when he got drafted, a lot of people I don't think expected this level of production this early by any means. I don't know anyone that would have had him producing at a faster clip than Mike Evans or Jordan Matthews or anyone else. So. And look, 16th where I have him is probably low, quite honestly. I could probably bump him up a couple more. But, I think the lesson here, listeners, is Kelvin Benjamin is really good, and you should get him if you can.
Yeah. Every time he catches a touchdown, he's wearing a cornerback like a necklace while he catches it. So I really just enjoy watching it. But here's my real question. You have Torrey Smith at 26th. I have him at 63. Again, I think I'm probably the bigger outlier here, but what are your thoughts on Smith? Obviously, he's been overtaken by Steve Smith, and granted, that'll probably be a short-term situation, but do you not see that as an indictment on Torrey Smith at all?
Not really. I think, for me, Torrey Smith still has the size and the ability of a wide receiver one. And look, I think it's also one of those things where, look, I can't imagine Baltimore headed into the offseason thinking, oh man, we really need to supplant Torrey Smith with a guy like Steve Smith. I think Steve Smith kind of fell into their lap, quite honestly, when he got cut by Carolina. And you believe me, you could speak more to that than I could. But I think it was just circumstance that led Smith to, or Steve Smith, I should say, to Baltimore. And look, they're chucking it. There's no doubt about it. But I'm still a believer in Torrey Smith's ability, and look, he's a free agent after this year. If he doesn't re-sign with Baltimore, I think he could end up on a team where they look to him to fill that number one role and could sort of regain some of that production that he had earlier. So I'm not ready to sell yet on Torrey. Yes, it's not good that Steve Smith, who's also like 40 years old, is completely outplaying you, but I'm not ready yet to drop him.
I mean, I wouldn't be embarrassed that you're worse than Steve Smith. A lot of receivers can say that, but
no, because if in Torrey's case, he would punch you. So
yeah, he probably will punch Torrey.
Right.
I feel with Torrey Smith, like there's not really a sophistication there as a route runner, and I question the hands. There are real weaknesses there in the game, so I don't really see him as ever being a number one wide receiver. I know that he was forced into that role, so to speak, on the team before they brought in Steve Smith, but I just don't think it's as natural. Let's see. Was that a question or yours? I kind of lost track. I think you're up.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, and I think this doesn't get talked about enough, who we have at the top, which is a consensus, I think, amongst all of the PFF rankers that have done them recently, which is Dez Bryant at 1. And yeah. I don't think there's truly any doubt anymore about that. I mean, obviously not within our own site. So let's just quickly go down the reasons for that, Scott. You can lead us off.
He's healthy.
Well, true, but I think more so than that. I mean, he's just, to me, as far as natural ability, it's between him and Julio. And look, Julio, and when you're talking about the number one ranking, you sort of have to split hairs at that point. And I think Dez is just in an overall better offense than Julio Jones right now. But he is. That's the fact of the matter. And they got a better line in Dallas. They've got a better quarterback in Dallas, and they have a way better running back in Dallas to take some of the heat off. So, I think Dez is the king of dynasty receivers now.
I actually had an easier time ranking Dez at 1 than I did at sussing out 2 through 5. So maybe I think Bryant is more clear of the pack than you do. But I went Bryant 1, then Julio Jones 2, Demaryius Thomas 3, Jordy Nelson 4, and Antonio Brown 5. I have Calvin at 7th and A.J. Green at 8th. both probably influenced by the health of them right now,
Sure.
and that'll probably change in a few weeks, honestly.
Yeah.
Let's see. I just thought it was funny that I have Larry Fitzgerald at 40th and you have him at 28th, but I think we're both on the Larry Fitzgerald Patriots 2016 bandwagon. So don't give Fitz away for free in your dynasty league, because I think he has the potential to rebound if his situation improves.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, and you and I have gone back and forth on that. Look, he could still produce. Look, we both have him squarely in that wide receiver 3-4 category as it stands today, and I don't think there's any shame in that. Look, with Carson Palmer at quarterback, he's a very productive receiver, and yeah, you're right. If he ends up on another team next year, which, if his cap number is any indication, he most certainly will. Yeah, it just depends on where he goes. But if he goes to a situation like New England, it could be Randy Moss 2007 all over again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's that explosive, so I don't think the touchdown upside is quite
Scott,
there. But I agree.
Help me out here, Scott. Help me out.
He could be a top 5 receiver on the Patriots. I agree. Is it your turn? Yeah, go ahead.
You and I, not that much of a difference, but when we're talking this high, I think it is. We have Randall Cobb sort of in different tiers, I would say. You have him number 6. I have him number 14. 6 is pretty tall cotton, Scott.
It is, and I wanted to join you because I always have been and always will be Team Jordy Nelson. I think Jordy's better than him. I think he's the clear number 1 option on the team. But after a while, you're just like, if you catch a touchdown every game, then I think I have to respect you, especially when you're 23 years old and you're big for your role as a slot receiver. So I think this is a lot about his destiny being tied to that of Aaron Rodgers. But I still have Nelson higher. But I mean, Cobb is looking like a top 5 receiver this season, and he's super young. It's hard to go away from that.
Yeah, and look, I will be with you once he re-signs a long-term deal in Green Bay, right? Which he hasn't yet. So as soon as that happens, and like you said, his production is squarely tied to Aaron Rodgers, then I will jump on board in that bandwagon all day.
That's fair. I have Emmanuel Sanders at 16th, and you have him at 43, and Mike has him at 49. So I get that I'm the outlier, but I think I don't really understand. Like, can you explain to me why you don't have Emmanuel Sanders ranked higher?
Yeah, I think it's, a couple things. The same reason why you don't necessarily, I mean, I think Demaryius Thomas is different. I think his production's, Peyton Manning proof, if you want to call it. But
sure.
Between a combination of Manning's age and just the fact that there's so many mouths to feed in Denver right now, look, I'm not for redraft leagues, I think Emmanuel Sanders is great. I think he's, probably a solid wide receiver too. But long term, I can't put my trust in that as a wide receiver 2/3 as you have. I mean, he's very good and he's going to give you very good days. But between Manning's age and there's just so many mouths to feed there, man.
Well, there'll be one less when Wes Welker leaves next season, right?
True, but then you've got Cody Latimer bringing up the rear.
Fair point.
Yeah, look, he's very good, and like I said, redraft leagues, I'm all over it. But for dynasty, I don't. And look, receivers, I think, are a little more predictable long term than running backs are. Well, I know that to be true. So I think it's fair to wonder what Emmanuel Sanders will be doing, 3 to 4 years from now. So.
Yeah, but I mean, Sanders was the top 40 receiver last year with the Steelers, so it's not like it can't happen anywhere else. But I understand. Any more receivers from your end?
No, I think that was it. We can move on to some tight ends because this will be fun.
Okay, I only actually wrote down one tight end difference here, so why don't you start?
Wait, can I guess what it was? Let me guess what it was.
Yeah, but it was kind of low, so it may not be that interesting, but go ahead.
Owen Daniels.
Oh, that's not who I did.
Okay.
I didn't even look. Where do we have Daniels? I'm sure I have him in the top 10, right? Or maybe 12.
Close. You have him 16th. I have him 22nd. So.
Oh, wow, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's obviously a short-term versus long-term play thing for me.
Sure.
I think Daniels is a top 10 tight end the rest of the way this season.
Sure.
And given that, I think you probably run out of what I would consider to be long-term assets at the position after like 8 guys.
Right.
I think that's where I'm starting to lean really heavily on the short-term production there.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't necessarily disagree with that. And look, if you're looking at the lower end tight end ones, it's really kind of sketchy, quite honestly. It's real hit and miss. I mean, you've got guys that, look, if it were up to fantasy pundits, they'd get, I don't know, 8 catches a game and 100 yards and a touchdown. But that doesn't happen for one reason or another. You've got your Tyler Eiferts and Ladarius Greens and Zach Ertz all in that little bunch, and whether it's injury or scheme or whatever, it's just not happening. So I could see it with Daniels, because at least you're getting more of a sure thing than a lot of other options there.
Yeah, that's my thought. So the one that I wrote down is that I have Tim Wright at 14 and you have him at 27. For me, Wright is a sneaky fantasy asset in the long term. Last year he was a rookie for the Buccaneers and actually had an historically great rookie season in terms of just raw statistics.
Sure.
He had a ton of yards. He had a ton of catches. Now he is, I guess, not really playing a ton with the Patriots right now, but that was a midseason trade. So to me, it's not really that surprising that he's taking a while to get sort of ingrained into the offense, but we've seen a little bit of action lately. I think he caught a touchdown 2 weeks ago. I think that Wright has a chance to become a top 10 tight end some point this season, and I think that his future is very bright.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with all that. I think unless your name's Rob Gronkowski, I don't trust anyone in the Patriot offense right now. So
right now, yes.
Yeah, right. Until that offense can sort of coagulate a little more for me, it's a crapshoot at this point. And look, I'm not denying anything you said. Wright was very good last year, and I think it definitely took some people by surprise when Tampa took Safarian Jenkins as high as they did with Wright sitting there. And look, the potential's there. I mean, look, we've seen it with New England where they run that 2 tight end offense to perfection. So it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. And look, I thought where I had him, I think what you said, 24th or 28th. To me, I thought that was pretty generous, to go quite honestly with him. So, but you're right. I think the ceiling is definitely there. I do think that.
All right, that exhausts my list. Michael said the rest of them are from you.
Okay, so one that we completely disagreed on was Eric Ebron. I had him at 10th, you had him at 21st, and I don't think we really need to discuss this because I think you've stated your case between Matt Stafford and Calvin Johnson, where your heart is with that Lions offense. So I think that's been pretty self-evident as we've spoken so far, Scott.
I'd actually just say refer to some of our previous podcasts. This is actually all about my lack of trust in Ebron himself. I think he has no hands, so I think it's going to be an issue for him. Like I basically think Ebron has Jermichael Finley's future, and think of that as valuable as you want to think of it. I just don't think it's that valuable.
Which is funny because I think some dynasty rankers still rank Jermichael Finley, even though he hasn't been on a team in about a half a year. So.
Some people will always love tools, even when they never actually produce on the field.
Right, which explains, I think, why some people still have Adrian Robinson there too. But I digress. So
he's not in my rankings anymore.
He's
good
not
try,
on
Michael.
Never on mine. I could honestly say that. So I'm right there with you. No, but one
he was on mine, but I didn't realize Larry Donnell was going to be awesome. So my bad.
To be fair, I don't know that anyone on planet Earth thought Larry Donnell would be. So. But one guy that we did have exactly the same was Heath Miller at 23rd, which, even that I think might be a little low. Am I crazy?
Yeah. You're not crazy. I was looking through leaders and stuff, preparing for the show and preparing for some other things I've been doing over the last week, and I was kind of stunned by how many targets and receptions Heath Miller is getting this season. And I think that I just kind of assumed that it was a plug-and-play thing with Marcus Wheaton going forward in that offense. And what's really happened is instead of going Antonio Brown and then a second and third wide receiver with Miller being his normal thing, I feel like Miller's really taken a lot of that extra work from the wide receiver 2 spot this season. And Miller's a totally safe tight end 1 the rest of the way this season. So
he really people don't understand. 2 years ago, he was a legit I think, top 5 or 6 tight end in fantasy scoring. I mean, he is literally Ben Roethlisberger's boy. There's like no doubt about it, right? I mean, look, Antonio Brown is going to get his. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I agree with you. I think after Brown, I think Roethlisberger's squarely looking at Miller. And look, it's not a sexy pick by any stretch of the imagination, but he is reliable. It's sort of like a poor man's Greg Olsen, right? Where you sneakily don't realize just how good and consistent they've been, but guess what? They have been, and you really need to take advantage of it.
Yeah. That's sort of the anti-tools guy too. So it's like
right.
there's no number of top 8 seasons Heath Miller could put up to ever get people to rank him in the top 10. So
right. He is the anti-Jermichael Finley. So
exactly. All right, you got any more for me, Michael?
No, I think we covered a lot. I don't know. What do you want to revisit this after about a month? I'm sure I'll have Doug Martin completely off the list by then.
Yeah, we probably should. We should probably make a more regular effort to keep our dynasty rankings up to date. So I think let's try to make that a goal of ours, and we can do that going forward. But I encourage everybody that's in the dynasty league or maybe ready to either trying to go all in this season or ready to rebuild, check out the site, check out our dynasty rankings. We have a lot of good guys that do it. You can pick your favorite. If you think that I'm a moron, you can sort by Michael's rankings. Doesn't matter. Not going to offend me. So definitely check that out on the site, and we'll try to work Dynasty into the show more often going forward. But I think that's going to do it for us tonight, Michael. Again, joined by Michael Moore. This is Scott Spratt with the Fantasy Slant. Thanks for listening, and we'll look forward to talking to you again next week.